One, thank you. Just shows you have a couple of weeks off and you're struggling to decide how you work these things. Okay, so if I could be authorised to sign the minutes of the meetings of the Human Resources Committee held on the 3rd of April and the 24th of May 2023 as correct proceedings. Thank you. Thank you very much. If I can sign these and get rid of these, which there are two. Pass that in that direction. Thank you very much. Okay, so apologies and substitutes. Is any member present is substituting for any other member, and if so, to declare their name as a substitute member and the name of the absent member. Louise, we've got an apology, I believe.
Yes, apologies received from Councillor Hacking.
Okay, and unfortunately the substitute member is on annual leave, on holiday, yeah? Okay. To consider such other items that are urgent and due notice of which has been given to the Head of Paid Services by the 12th of noon on the day of the meeting. Have we had any extra? No, we haven't, no. Okay, disclosure of interests. To receive any disclosure by members of personal and disclosable pecuniary interests in matters on the agenda. The nature of any interest, whether the member regards the personal interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Members are reminded of the need to repeat the declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. No declarations. So we can move into the first agenda item, which is the recommendations of the Home Working Allowance Task and Finish Group. I believe you're going to present this, Maria?
Certainly.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, Chair. I just wanted to introduce the report to you. On the 3rd of April at our HR committee meeting, it was agreed to put together a task group to look at the consideration of a home working allowance in line with the requests that came through from the Unison pay claim for 2023. And to summarise, a meeting took place on the 7th of July. A good in-depth discussion was had by the group. And I think this report here summarises these discussions, so I won't go through them in detail. But the outcome of this was to recommend that a home working allowance payment not be introduced at this current time. So if there's any questions, I think myself or the task group would be happy to take those. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
I'm assuming now that actually if every member of staff decided to work in the office, there is now a place for every member of staff to work.
I think it's extremely unlikely that every member of staff will be in the office at the same time, but obviously we have got additional accommodation coming on the Amherst Road side, which will add to the desk space that we have. So we will continue to monitor that and make sure that those desks are available to staff that want to be in. I don't know if Maria's got anything to add to that, but it's not an ongoing concern, and we continue to ask staff regularly what their anticipated working pattern is going to be. And each team has developed a team agreement, so we do have a fairly good idea what that team agreement does. Is sets out the pattern that staff are expected to work, and that is about balancing the individual needs with the service needs and the business needs of the council as a whole. So quite a lot of work is ongoing and has been done to make sure that we can accommodate staff's needs.
I mean, when we had COVID and everybody had to work from home, I can remember staff sitting on their beds with their laptops and I assume that we did support some members of staff financially at that time. I mean, I very much support the idea of choice here, because I think there's some certain bonuses working from home, saving on transport, time, all sorts of things, flexibility. And of course, we trust staff. It's a way of trusting staff to do their job. So I'm very much in favour of those who want to, can. concerned a bit about those people who don't have the comfortable, shall I say, equipment or needs.
If I can just add there, this was a discussion that we did have at the time because home working was sort of just evolved out of COVID. Perhaps Maria can just update with regards to the request that we had from staff in order to provide that they had a workstation within their home in some way.
Yeah, we did have risk assessments completed for staff when they were working at home, in particular those that were identified as not a concern but uncomfortable or working not as we would like them to be working. So managers did get involved and spoke to them, and we had risk assessments, and I actually spoke to a lot of staff during that period to make sure they were comfortable. So any issues that were raised we dealt with at the time and dealt with the individual to try and get a happy medium. And some of those during COVID we brought back into the office early to make sure that they were comfortable. IT were extremely quick at getting out extra equipment to staff as well to ensure they had everything they needed for their work. So,
Yeah, can you not see my light where you sat, Jim?
But yes, but if you should just indicate first of all, and then I can turn mine off. Otherwise, the sound gets distorted everywhere. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So Unison brought this to the table. Number one, obviously, there's a financial incentive to staff to work from home, and also to bring us in parity with neighbouring councils. We know Wealdon offers a working home allowance. I don't know about Hastings, but Wealdon does. And the staff survey took place and staff indicated ideally they'd like to work from home for 2 or 3 days and in the office 2 days a week. But at that time, I think we all knew it was on the agenda to consider a working at home allowance. And now it seems like working at home allowance isn't going to progress from the recommendations of the tasking group. Then I foresee potential financial hardship for staff if, for example, we get a pretty harsh winter and people are sat working at home with their boilers churning away. We all know how expensive utility costs are. You know, they might think, actually, I'll go in the office rather than spend my money warming my house, because if the house is empty, why would I leave my heating on? So they might actually decide to go into the office. And your question was a very good point, that there simply isn't enough seating if all staff decide to come into the office. There simply isn't. I've had a very productive meeting with the Chief Executive this afternoon, and there are plans afoot to increase the number of workstations. Now, when that increase comes to fruition, which hopefully will be November time, then it'll be a different story. But as it stands at the moment, there simply isn't enough seats, and we are expecting our staff to work from home without any compensation whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you. Eleanor.
Yeah, because I don't actually think Councillor Pritchett's question was really answered, because I think the point here is if we are forcing people to work from home because we don't have physically space for them to work, I don't think it is reasonable to expect them to pay for their heating, etc. But if we're saying that anyone that wants to work in the office can come into the office, then I don't think we should be subsidising people's heating. You know, it's that way around. So if we're saying we've got, at the moment people aren't paying for their heating, also obviously people are saving money and not commuting, petrol prices are very high. So look, there will be, you know, there's a reason people want to work from home, isn't there? Let's face it. You know, it's more flexible. You don't have the travel time and costs. So we shouldn't then be giving people more money for what they want to do it. So therefore, we shouldn't be giving them extra money, in my view. But I think the key question is, if people are being forced to work from home because they cannot physically work in the office, then yes, we should be doing something. But you're saying that that isn't the case at the moment. Thank you.
Perhaps I can invite Ash to, I think you chaired this task group, Ash, and I know that you discussed every aspect of it, so perhaps you could just give us a resume on that or respond to any comments that have been made so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Just in response to Councillor Kirby-Green, the conversation around choice was the most critical point. And I think it was very much around the fact that we gained clarity at the meeting to confirm that no staff member within Rother has a home working contract. So no one has a home working contract at this moment in time. And so by that, the council isn't insisting that any employees work from home. And I think one of the things we said to incorporate, and it is incorporated in the report, that if that became a thing, then absolutely, I think we would certainly need to reconsider this proposition. But at this moment in time, it is very much a case of if anyone wants to work in the office, the commitment from Lorna is to find them a space. There is sufficient space at the moment. If the numbers of people wanting to come into the office increase, again, the commitment is to find a space to do that. Other aspects that obviously we considered, pretty much every angle, and I think ultimately the basis of the report came down to the fact that it was an optional working arrangement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. So it was out of choice. Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I am sort of disappointed by the outcome from this, although I understand from the conversations that the working group had, I sort of understand the rationale behind that, and my concerns are around with the winter coming. If we have another situation like we had last winter, or even worse with the cost of living, are we sort of seriously saying to staff that if you can't afford to pay for your heating, you have to get into your car and drive through sort of cold, wintry conditions to sit in a potentially cold office if no one else is in there and heating hasn't been turned on yet? So that's one concern. I know that a lot of staff tend to match their working from home days with the rest of their colleagues in their team, so the team will go home together and come in together. And I wonder if we've actually thought about calculating if a whole team is out of a part of the council building for several days a week, what the savings are on not having to heat that part of the building, or what the savings would be if we had a more efficient heating system. Because maybe there could be something where actually, we're not spending as much money heating our offices, and could that money be transferred into helping staff heat their homes, particularly if this winter gets worse? My other thought was, if Wealdon and other councils can afford a working from home allowance, why can't we? Although I do understand sort of what the report says from the working group. But I think my overall sort of sense is just disappointment that we can't do this. I feel like if finances were better, if situations were better, if this council was properly funded, if we were in a prosperous position, this would absolutely be something we'd do without question. And so it's heart-wrenching really that we're not able to do that. And as soon as we are able, I hope we do.
I think it's means to an end. I think that's not unreasonable. Are you going to add something to this,
Yes.
Simon, or just reiterate what you've already said?
I am going to add to it. Thank you. So if that's, I'm okay to speak now. Thank you. So the two councillors, Kirby Green and Joe One, basically gave us the opinion that if all staff want to come in, there are enough seats. That simply isn't true. I don't believe that's true. If all staff...
Can I just hold you there just for a moment?
You can.
If I can just ask, because I know that this has been discussed, and that with the Chief Executive and HR with regard to working space.
Project team as well that worked on it originally.
Yeah, and there has been a lot of work to identify the capacity of seats. So to say that that's incorrect, perhaps is not quite the choice of words. Lorna, could I just ask you to respond to that?
A lot of thought has gone in, and a lot of discussions happen within teams, and I think that's really important. And as I said, it's for each team to kind of come up with their own proposal. So we made sure that the way these discussions happened were really sort of bottom up, and every single team has discussed this, and every service has a team agreement. There's nothing from those team agreements that indicates that we're going to be overwhelmed with people wanting to come back into the office. But having said that, we need to keep it under review. We are creating more space within the building as well, and we'll have to monitor it. Things do change, but at this moment in time, that is not a concern. And I don't know if Maria's got any further evidence to back that up, but that's, I think what's most important is we've really, really engaged on this, and we've got a really good understanding of the expectations of staff.
Yeah, I agree with Lorna. We've done a lot of work on the team agreements within teams with managers, and lots of work's happened. One thing I did want to point out is that the only council that pays a home working allowance within East and West Sussex is Wealdon. No other council pays a home working allowance, and the LGA in the national conditions pay award have not offered a home working allowance. But in attending their meeting, they have said that they will look to it in the future. So it's something that I will keep an eye on and report back to you as and when I hear anything.
Thank you for that. And I'd like to think that we would keep all things under review, because then that's an appropriate way of dealing with the issues that are ahead. We don't know what the winter's going to be like, Sam. You know, we're playing pure conjecture as to what winters could be like and heating bills, etc. But I think that we've got to leave it open in order to review this, given the circumstances. Do you want to add something new to that, Sam?
Yeah, only another question. I can't remember if it is still in there. I thought it was. In our climate strategies and all of that side of things from the council, is there still a drive to encourage working from home? Because at one point, that was a sort of, I know the pandemic sort of came in at the same time, and so we stopped talking about it because it happened. But at one point, we were really seriously talking about encouraging staff to work from home, encouraging sort of fewer days in the town hall. Is that still part of our climate agenda? Because if so, then eventually we are going to have to look at those sort of contracts and things, I think, down the line.
We're not at that stage at the moment, and we have been developing a hybrid working policy, which I think is important. And I think, as Lorna and Maria said, it does give us the opportunity of working with service managers, with their team, in order to actually make sure that we've got a situation where we can conduct our business, but also the welfare of staff. And I think that's an important thing. Are there any other points that need to be raised, Ash? Thank you.
Just to summarise a couple of points. So the first one was around Wealdon, and obviously you've clarified that already, that Wealdon is the only one that's paying a home working allowance. From the information that we saw, they are one of the only councils that have contracted home workers. So to benchmark and compare against staff that are contractually working from home is a very different proposition to what we're talking about today. The other aspects in terms of, I completely take on board Councillor Coleman's comments around, winter, cost, etc. I think if we frame it in a sense that what has fundamentally changed. So 3 years ago, 4 years ago, people didn't work from home at all, and were travelling to the office and were working in an office. So it's just kind of taking that step back and understanding what has changed. And the bit that's fundamentally changed is that we've given people choice to be able to work from home, which I think is a real benefit. Third point that I wanted to make, just around the cost. Certainly from my perspective, the cost of providing a home working allowance didn't form part of my decision making, because we weren't provided with any projections of cost. So actually, I've got no idea whether this would be a relatively low budget thing to achieve or whether it's a high budget thing. So for me, the decision was not around the financial impact on this particular report. It was more about the principle of a home working allowance, which, as Councillor Kirby-Green said, it effectively then becomes incentivisation to work from home. And then you've got people that, I would like a payment to come into the office. It's where do you then make that distinction? But those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Sue, do you want to add something to that?
Just very quickly, I know you want to cap it, but I think it's good that we're going to still look at it. That's great. With the points that we've raised, really useful. Thank you for those points that you've raised. I think if I were choosing what I'd like to see for new members of staff that we had an amount of money, perhaps for them to set up, say, I don't know, £500. I don't know, that for this to make sure they could work from home happily, paying for whatever they need to pay for initially. That would be something that I'd quite like to see. The other thing, just to throw in a curveball, is that I've been reading about the South Cambridgeshire model, which is a 4-day week. And they've just done a trial period on it, and it's been really successful in many, many ways. So just that's another thought.
This is the one that the Gove has Suppressed. Okay, well that's something else. It may work in a different sort of commercial environment. I'm not sure it's value for money for taxpayers.
Thank you. If I can just respond to Councillor Proshak. So in terms of the home working allowance, this was predominantly around utilities and the cost of home. I think as an employer, we would always have a responsibility to ensure that people have the correct environment. So, you know, if there were workplace adjustments that would need to be made for vulnerability, disability, anything like that, then I would say that would be the responsibility of the council under our normal policy. So this isn't any form of grant or anything like that, or to pay towards equipment, which would always be done separately.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think we're in a situation where we are looking to vote on the resolve of the home working allowance payment not to be introduced at the current time. Thank you for Ash, Mark, and I think Lizzie isn't here tonight, but she was on that group, and I know you spent a lot of time on it, and thank you very much indeed for your outcome. So if we can have a proposal, yeah, and someone to second, and those in favour? Mark, you're on the work group, but you don't feel as though you can support it. Oh well, that's unfortunate. Thank you. We'll move on that. I think that's moved on. You want to make a comment, Sam? No? All right, sorry, you're looking at me as if you wanted to say something. Those against? Okay, thank you for that, but I think it's unanimous. Sorry, majority. Thank you. Amazing. Okay, can we move on then to the next item, which is the pay award, which I've got here somewhere. Bear with me. No, I've got it. No, I have it here. I did have it here. Sorry, it was here. I got confused with what we were the last meeting. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've dealt with the outcome of the home working allowance, and we will now move into the next item, which is the review of local pay award. To consider the 2023 staff pay award and make recommendations as appropriate. Okay, so vote, please, Lorna. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So, as the leader said, this report sets out options for the 2023 pay award, and I think it is important to consider the context in which we're making this decision, or members are making this decision, and it is a balancing act between the financial position of the council, which remains very, very challenging, and recognising the cost of living crisis that we are working in and making sure that we are considerate of that as well. I think it is worth pointing out that any pay settlement is not a one-off. It then continues through into budgets for future years. And, of course, a major cost to the council is the pay bill. And we need to bear that in mind. There have been ongoing discussions with staff side and Unison, and I meet regularly with Simon and his colleagues. And we have discussed the position for the pay award for this year. The expectation from Unison is that the annual pay award will reflect the national pay claim, and the national pay negotiations for local government have not been settled yet for 23-24, and the National Joint Committee has responded to the unions and offered a very similar package to last year, which is set out in Appendix 1, but in summary that's £1,925 per annum, or 3.88% for higher grades. Appendix 2 sets out the proposal, what that would mean for the Council's position. As part of the annual budget setting process, Rother's pay award for 23-24 was budgeted for at 3%, and a further 2% used in the agreed medium-term financial plan for future years. I think it's also worth bearing in mind for each 1% pay increase on the budgeted
figures, this would increase costs annually by approximately £111,000. What's been proposed here is set out in paragraph 9. So option 1 is the recommended 3% pay award that would cost the council £333,000 per annum. And as I've said, this has already been built into the forecast contained within the medium-term financial strategy. And if the committee was minded to go with that option, it wouldn't need a decision to full council. Option 2 is Unison's proposal and the pay claim set out in Appendix 2, Appendix 1, and that would cost the council in a region of £482,000 per annum, approximately £150,000 over the recommended 3%. And of course, this additional funding would need to be identified from somewhere else. As I said at the beginning, this is a balancing act. And we need to bear in mind the future pressures on the council's budget. We do have Simon to answer any questions on Unison's pay claim, and I'm sure Maria can answer any further questions that you may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Obviously, there aren't any questions. Okay, given the fact that there is an option 1 to be looked at, if there are no questions, we can look at a proposal that we recommend. Are you asking a question, Simon?
Yes, please, Chair. If I
or are you making a statement?
I'm making a statement. I just wondered if you're going to go straight into a vote and then I'd miss my opportunity.
Well, so you have your statement from Unison is attached to here, which we've all read. So you're not just going to reiterate that?
I am certainly not just going to reiterate that.
No, you're going to ask a question. I think it's a case of answering questions, and that's what why you're here.
I will ask a question, Chair, yes.
You're making a question of the Chief Executive?
It's a question to the HRC.
Okay, proceed with your question then.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that I'm here tonight to represent all of our DC staff, not just those that are union members. The decisions that you make tonight will affect all staff. We only have to look at recent public sector pay rises. For example, state pensioners saw their pay rise by 10.1%. Universal credit claimants also received a 10.1% pay rise. NHS staff received a 5% pay rise. The police received a 7% pay rise. Doctors have received a 6% pay rise. Fire officers 5%, armed forces 5%, and our nearest sort of big employer in Bexhill, Hastings Direct, also received a 5% pay rise. So I am basically imploring you tonight to sort of consider an offer higher than 3%. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Simon. And have you got a proposal as to where this money is coming from?
I didn't know I was asked to do that. I have not seen the financial books.
I'm asking that question on the basis that you're seeking a higher pay award, and I'm really reiterating, where does it come from? And I think that's the important thing that we've got to... We value our staff, and I think it's very important that we're in a situation where we protect jobs, because our budget is in deficit, and we've got to take our heads out of the sand and actually tackle that during this period of this administration. And to load our budget with additional costs that we don't know where it's coming from because of uncertainty is a very difficult one for us to deal with. I think we do, as I said, we do value our employees. I think that we are a good organisation to work for. But we don't want to be in a situation where if we don't balance our budget and we're having to dispense with discretionary services, that could mean the loss of jobs. And that's the reality of where we are at the moment. And it's a very difficult balancing act for us to deal with. So I hope that that is taken into account. It's not as though we're not wanting to, it's where it's coming from. And perhaps I can invite Chief Finance Officer to make any comments that he would wish to this evening with regard to the state of our finances. Eleanor, did you...
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I've got Duncan. Yeah, perhaps if I can ask Duncan to respond in some way, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Yeah, I think in terms of the context of the decision making tonight, the position of the council's overall finances are really key. So we've got some significant financial pressures in the future. We're looking at a budget deficit next year of around £3 million, because not only are we putting in about £2 million from reserves, but we've also got an expectation of over £1 million from the Financial Stability Programme, and we still need to identify the detailed level of where those savings are actually going to come from. So, as the Chair has already mentioned, we've budgeted £333,000 into the forecast currently, which again, on its own, is a challenge to meet. And I do appreciate the pressure on public sector staff and the challenges people have in terms of cost of living and everything at the moment. But as several people have mentioned tonight, there is a balancing position for the council to address here, and we do need to protect jobs for the future. And we need to be mindful of where those cost pressures are coming in, and we need to agree a position this evening that we think we can afford. At the moment, the only place for those additional costs to come from is from the council's reserves, and that's not a sustainable position to balance your budgets. And we're getting perilously close to the £5 million minimum balance that we have set and recommended at the moment. So the scope for increasing any of these areas is not really there in terms of having a balanced medium-term financial position. So I think that's the context of where we are. It's incredibly challenging. It's going to continue to be challenging for the coming years. And I think we need to try and take those things into account when we're taking decisions of this nature. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Duncan. Are there any other questions of... No? No questions? Ash, did you want to make any comment, being responsible for, as Cabinet Lead for Finance? Is there any, I think, you want to add to that's already been said, please?
I don't think I can really add any more to Duncan's statement in terms of the finances. You know, I think the point that you made is that it's not about not valuing the team and the staff. It is literally coming down to where is the money going to come from to pay for it. I think, you know, in previous years, where the financial outlook has been different, the pay award has always been reflective of the council's income. You know, we are not a corporate organisation. We don't do profit share, but I think the way that previous pay awards have taken that into consideration, the overall financial position. So you can't just take that financial position into account when it's in the plus. You've then got to take that into consideration in the minus, which is unfortunately the situation we're in at the moment. So I absolutely don't want the theme of this evening to be that we don't care and that we don't want to do anything. There just isn't the means to do it. And even exploring, you know, options of where the money can come from, I think what really hit home is that I've sat in numerous meetings where heads of services, etc., are looking to make savings within their retrospective areas, and you know that they're all doing their very, very best to keep services exactly as they are and not cut anything out, but make efficiencies in terms of how we do things. And this will literally undo all of those savings in one foul swoop and more. You know, so we'll end up with a reduced amount and the loss of those efficiencies coming into place as well.
And it could mean some difficult decisions that having to be made as a result of that. And I think that we have a responsibility to maintain services as well as we're able to, and maintain and protect the jobs of our valued staff. Lorna, did you want to make any comment? Sorry, Alan, did you wish a big comment?
I was going to say, yeah, the point I make is the same as last year. We had a discussion last year around the higher offer or the lower one, and the answer that I was given was, we will definitely have to cut jobs. If we go for the higher amount, we will have to cut jobs. Now, I found it extraordinary that several people on the committee did still vote for that higher amount, but I personally think we should be protecting jobs. So, yeah, obviously, if money was, everywhere, we'd be giving staff an increase. So it's not the fact that we don't, respect them and recognise what they do. But to me, it's more important to protect jobs in this industry. One question I would ask is, do you know what our attrition rate is?
Maria? Come back to you on that one, I think. Okay. Sue?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's absolutely, as we've heard from Ash, is a no-brainer, this one, sadly, because Rother District Council did nothing without its staff. It's absolutely nothing. Wouldn't exist. The comment I wanted to make, I don't know how many jobs, 15,000, is it 150,000, sorry. I don't know how many jobs that represents, but it's jobs, and it would mean cuts to jobs. And so we're in this invidious position, which has been dealt to us by the government. And we're not the only council that's going through this pain. And I'm sorry, it's not our bad management, it's not our staff fault, it's the government have actually decimated local authorities. And I have to make that point because we are now faced with this decision where we're having to say, yes, we value staff, but the point I was going to make, though, Chair, if it's possible, the Unison in paragraph 3 have said that the local membership have voted unanimously to start the process of requesting the council rejoins the MGAC. Is that possible to look at that as well? Thank you.
I think we would like to look at that on a future basis. I think that's important that we do that because things are changing all the time. It was a conversation that we had last year, and I think it's something that we would keep under review. So I think that from tonight's meeting that we can say there are things that we want to keep under review. We've got an annual settlement. We'll be looking at this again in 12 months' time. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with Councillor Proshak that the blame, if you like, for this lies squarely with the government and just their complete abandoning of local councils in terms of funding them and forcing taxpayers to be like pretty much the sole source of funding for all of the services that local government provide beyond the odd grants here and there and capital investments and risky borrowing and things. But really, we need proper inject from government, and until that happens, we are going to be continually forced to make decisions like this, which are almost impossible. And I want to make this clear, because I'm, a trade unionist and a supporter of that side of things, that I don't for one second believe that any councillor here doesn't want the best for staff and doesn't value staff and doesn't really care about our staff and making sure that they get paid well. I absolutely want to make that point. But at the same time, my concerns continue to be with the cost of living seemingly not going away, with the winter coming in. I know we don't know what's going to happen in winter, but we know it's not going to be good. I think, we have just adopted a socio-economic duty as a council, and I'd hope that as part of that, perhaps some sort of discretionary money can be looked at if there are members of staff who are identified as really struggling over this next period, to really be picked up on that. The one thing I wanted to query, and hopefully Duncan can give some sort of highlight to this, is there is a desire from Unison, from the union side of things, to look at sort of an April date for the pay award rather than September, which is in line with when we're setting our budget and a lot of other authorities, and I think that makes a lot more sense. And obviously we couldn't backdate necessarily because that would be more money, and as this report outlines, we don't have that. There was a suggestion at one point to almost, I don't know if the term's forward date it, but to do an award for a year and a half and then go from April going forwards, which in the short term would not necessarily be good news because it would mean that 3% was probably less than 3% over that year and a half, but longer term it would mean things are going from April. My question to Duncan, and I sent him an email about this, and he replied to me thankfully, and I asked Duncan what the saving would be from that extra half a year on this pay award, and Duncan identified that would be around 1,666,000. I can't help but find that figure as a saving of 166k, then look in this report and say that the Unison proposal would be approximately 150k above budgeting, and think that could we not use that saving to make it a higher award? Would that count? I'm sure Duncan will give me a reason why not, but it's a query nonetheless.
We'll invite Duncan to respond to that question. Duncan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think that's the issue, is slipping the pay award by 6 months puts it into another financial year, and you're still going to have to pay that money at some point in the future. So I think that conversation about when the payment is made is a conversation for the committee to have and to consider in line with whether the NJC is joined again. So I think at that point we can have those conversations. It's not something, if we save that money in this year, like Councillor Commons just mentioned, if you spread that pay award over 18 months, then the pay award technically then is even lower than the 3% that's already been offered. So I'm not sure that would be a benefit to the staff, although it would align potentially with the April date. And I'm in favour of aligning with the April date at some point in time, because it makes absolute sense to align your pay award with your financial year. It's quite strange to have that set midway through the year, but I think it's part of the wider conversation around rejoining the scheme potentially and then realigning all of those things. And then I think we can look at all of the financial impacts at that point in time. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity. I think that was important that we have that clarity. And I think that we must go away from this meeting tonight saying that we would look and review all aspects of our pay arrangements. I think that's important that we make that quite clear. And the points that Councillor Coleman and Sam made with regard to staff, I think we would all echo those points. I would certainly. So it's really out of what we're able to do and making absolutely certain that we continue to operate, and we don't want to slip into a situation like there are many, many other local authorities up and down the country who are really going to be in a very difficult position over these next few months. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a comment on the NJC side of things, and I wondered if maybe there was an appetite in this committee to add on to whatever we accept tonight, if it's a 3%, for example, a commitment to look at to look at joining the NJC next time round, because for me there's two benefits to it. Obviously there's a principal benefit for me in terms of collective bargaining, in terms of making sure that our staff are parable with other are at parity with other authorities, and that they have that collective voice, and that the decisions are being made by people with expertise in those matters on both sides, and the agreement is therefore usually fair. But also I think it doesn't feel fair for councillors to year after year have to sit here and have these difficult conversations where we want to pay staff more and we're told we can't over and over again, and we feel like we don't really have agency over that, and it feels like we're just a passing through. And I feel like the NJC takes this charade off the table and actually makes it a proper dialogue that can have some. So I think in principle, I think joining the NJC is a really important thing, and the sooner we can do that the better, in my view at least.
Okay, but we are an elected body. We're elected by the residents of Rother in order to maintain and provide services, and therefore we do have that obligation in order to control our finances, and that's why we have the ability to do that. But I take your point. I don't think that's unreasonable to consider that, providing it's not binding in any way, shape or form, because the future is just so uncertain. You know, there's no certainty about where we're going over this next while, and it can be years. You know, we're not just talking about the last few months or where we might be going, given the fact that all the uncertainty that's out there. Ash, if I can ask you to respond perhaps and add something to Sam's question.
Yes, thank you. I think, I made some previous comments in with regarding the NJC, and I think I would want it to kind of be a separate piece that we look at rather than merging it in with something else, because I think it is really important to look at it. I think my views at this moment in time is that I don't fully understand what those benefits are. So I would want to see, a real paper that outlines the benefits of being part of that collective bargaining. What does it give us? But the bit that's missing for me from the NJC is that they are agreeing what they would want it to look like. But again, there is no consideration as to where the money is going to come from. So in this scenario, if we were part of the NJC last year, for example, we would then have been given a figure, and absolutely it takes away those difficult decisions. And I know Maria and I have had a conversation about actually the staff time that's spent on, doing separate negotiations and everything else would disappear. And you would then just follow the national position. But I think what that then doesn't take into consideration is that every authority is different. So what you're then doing is pigeonholing us into the same thing that everybody is going to get all the way through, regardless of the state of the finances as to whether there is any feasible means to support that. Equally, there were scenarios in previous years where NJC figures were lower than the council offered. So you've got to take the good with the bad, I'm afraid. And that's why I'm not particularly supportive of that until I see, some real evidence of the benefits. Thank you.
I think that's a fair enough comment, and I think that we would want to make sure that we have a degree of control, but then again to see the benefits of national negotiations and how they would affect us, because I think that we have that responsibility locally. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, obviously I want us to rejoin the NJC, not just for the financial benefits that it potentially brings, because as you say, in previous years, Rother have paid more than the NJC. But long term, I don't want us to be back here this time next year having the same arguments that budgets have already been decided. If we're getting our pay settlements in September, if we're getting our pay settlements at the 1st of April, then basically the budgets are decided at the back end of the year, and discussions can then take place before other budgets then have to be changed. That's why it makes sense to me that the pay rise should be in April as well. That's the only point I wanted to make at this point.
Yeah, I think I think Duncan covered that off to a certain extent. But we are dealing in the reality of the world that we're in at the moment, and this uncertain world. And I think that we've made those points really quite clear tonight. So I think that's where we are. Mark, did you want to make a comment?
I did, thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that there is uncertainty in the world or in the country. The fact of joining the NJC would give certainty to the members of Unison and the employees of Rother District Council, because they know that there's the strength of that collective bargaining, and that is evened out across the country. And it also gives certainty to the council, because they know that if there is an obligation to pay, that they will have to find the money like any other statutory service. So I think it's an advantage to the employee. I think it's an advantage to the employer.
At the disposal of jobs and services, we've got to hold that very much in our minds as to what our responsibility is as elected members of the council. I think we've been able to deal with this tonight. I don't think there's any other questions coming through. I do appreciate everyone's openness this evening, and I think we can now move to vote on the options that are there. If someone would like to propose as set out in section 9, then we can take a vote. Thank you, Ash. A proposer, a second, Eleanor. Those in favour of option 1? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against option 1 or abstaining? Okay, well that's carried 4-2. Thank you for that. Thank you, Simon, for your attendance this evening, and thank you for those online that have attended the meeting this evening. And I think we're at a point where the meeting can be closed. There's no further business, and we can go offline. Thank you, Louise, for your help this evening.